Hello everyone, my name is Selena Mosley and on behalf of the organisers Oliver Kinross, I would like to welcome you all to London Build Online. This is the very first session of many more to come over the next 2 weeks, so be sure to check out the full agenda on the website. Today's session is a panel discussion on the UK's construction industry update. The session will be moderated by Simon Cash and joined by our amazing lineup of panellists. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A throughout the session, so take the time and opportunity to submit your questions in the questions box on your screen. I hope you all enjoy today's session, and I would like to hand it over to you now, Simon.
Thank you. Good morning. I hope people can see me as well, and webcam's on. I'm not sure if it is. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us for this panel session. I can see that there's already 200 people online, which is quite an incredible number of people. I'd also like to say a big welcome, obviously, to our esteemed panellists, Darren Rodwell, Councillor and Leader for Barking and Dagenham Council, Fergus Harradence, Deputy Director Construction at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Harbinder Birdi, who's a Partner and Head of Infrastructure and Transport at Hawkins Brown, Ian Small, Associate Director and Innovation Champion for Civil Infrastructure at AECOM, Lily Crompton, Senior Sustainability Manager for ISG, Pascal Paschalidis, Head of Innovation and Business Improvement at Eiffage, Kier, Ferrovial, BAM, JV. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful there. And Stefano Paiocchi, Associate at Zaha, Hadid Architects. So as Selena said, my name is Simon Cash, Director of Cost Management at Artelia UK, and I'll be moderating the discussion this morning. First of all, the UK's construction industry update is a wide topic for discussion, and I'm sure that many of you can think of subjects that should be covered from COVID-19 to carbon. I'm sure that we'll touch on these and many more. COVID-19 has obviously been a huge impact on our lives, both personally and from a business perspective. We've seen the construction industry sector respond to it in many ways, but what does it mean for the future as well? It's a question that needs to be asked. And then last week we saw Boris in his announcement of the government's 10-point plan for green industrial revolution, setting out a plan to achieve zero carbon. And the construction and obviously construction has got a huge part to play in that, especially when you bear in mind that building and construction is reported to be responsible for 39% of the carbon emissions around the world. And this is not the first time that we've seen carbon on the agenda for construction. It's one of the 4 focus points in the government's policy paper, Construction 2025. Many of us have obviously seen that and recognise that there's obviously a focus on reduction in cost and time, but there's also a target there for reduction in greenhouse gases as well. And then there's also, on a different tack, the recent government white paper in terms of planning for the future, which looks at reforming planning system in England and to improve the process and outcomes in terms of design and sustainability, which again impacts and refers to carbon. And that will then in turn potentially look at how we develop our communities and cities, and looks at the agenda of distributed cities rather than centralized cities. And then we've also through COVID obviously seen the impact of digital and the digital revolution and how that's been accelerated, and obviously that is going to change the way we work potentially. And then sitting underneath all of this, we can't forget that we've still got Brexit. That's not gone away. We've only got 39 days before the end of the transition period. So there's a huge amount there, and if we can't get a pretty good discussion going out of that lot, I'd be amazed. So I suppose it's a case of where to start. And maybe the best place to start is Brexit, as it's fast looming upon us. So a couple of questions for the panel is, do you think that as an industry that we are properly prepared for the changes and we understand the impact of them? And do you think there'll be a financial impact on construction costs as a result of the transition and the end of Brexit? So maybe, Fergus, if I could pass to you that first question.
Sure, Simon, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Well, I think it's an interesting question as to the extent to which the industry is prepared for Brexit. I think the picture is very mixed. It depends whereabouts in the country firms are, and it depends on the nature of the work that they undertake. So, for example, the evidence that we are gathering shows that those firms which are in the areas which are potentially likely to be most exposed to changes as a result of us leaving the EU at the end of the transitional period, in London and the southeast, where you have a large number of migrant workers from the EU and EEA as a component of the construction workforce, they tend to have done quite a lot of planning and quite a lot of preparation, and they've been exploring those areas which are potentially risks for them in terms of their ability to deliver contracts. Similarly, where you have product manufacturers or materials suppliers who depend on components or precursor materials, chemicals, for example, that come from the European Union. Again, you've seen some of these firms take steps to ascertain what the risks are and where possible to mitigate them. More widely across the industry, I think the level of preparedness is a lot lower. We are not seeing a lot of evidence emerging that the average construction firm, certainly outside London, the southeast, whether it's in house building or whether it's part of the supply chain delivering larger construction projects, is really taking steps to identify what the vulnerabilities are, whether it's in terms of the supply of products and the logistical networks through which these are developed, whether it's in relation to their own workforce or the workforce in subcontractors that they depend on, and also whether it's things like familiarising themselves with the new rules for product markings and the UK conformity assessment mark that's going to be introduced from the 1st of January. Partly this is due to the impact of COVID-19 on the industry, which has absorbed a phenomenal amount of time across the industry just managing their businesses and keeping going. But I think it is also attributable to a longer term trend that we've seen, where I think quite a few people in the construction industry, because it is so fragmented, you have so many firms coming together in order to undertake a project. I think a lot of firms have possibly mistakenly made the assumption that because they can't readily identify direct impact on them, they aren't they've been rather too quick to assume that there won't be any indirect impacts on them either. And that's something that they should probably look to address in the remaining time that they've got available. There are plenty of resources out there on various websites, the Government One's Construction Leadership Council website as well. It is well worth firms just taking a couple of hours to familiarise themselves with these things and then to think through what the consequences are for their business.
Okay, thank you. I mean, maybe Pascal, you're involved with a very large joint venture contracting organisation. Have you seen any preparation or impact in terms of the impending end of the transition period?
Hello, Simon. So thank you for the question. So I have only been with EKB for 5 months or so, but I can assure you that we're making the most out of our working together culture to address any risks in terms of the Brexit and any other risk factors. So obviously the fact that we're delivering on a specific project, that helps a lot with identifying risks properly and ensuring that we've got the assets and the resources in place for the next 5 years. So that's as far as I can tell on that.
Okay, thank you. Ian, you're involved with a large consultancy business, and I know Harbinder and Stefano, again, you're both with consultancy businesses, and Lily, obviously, with a large contracting organisation. Presumably, Brexit all has an impact on you in some form or another, and even Darren, I suspect, for a local authority, it must have an impact. So I don't know who would like to pick up on that. Would it Ian, maybe?
Yes. So hi everyone. Yes. So Brexit is having an impact and has had an impact pretty much since the vote. We've had quite a big shift in our people and where they come from, and quite often with our European colleagues, wanting to move back to our offices in Europe rather than remaining in the UK, and so the nationality balance across our teams has changed quite considerably. But I think in terms of our direct preparations for Brexit, it's more of a wait and see to see what the contractors that we work with impacts are, rather than us as a designer. We're fairly, I think, well, in my opinion, we're fairly insulated. Whether that will bear out or not in the coming months or not, I'm not quite sure. But yes, it's been an ongoing impact rather than something we're preparing for in January.
Okay, and it was interesting that I don't know whether it's whether it can be related, but obviously one of the 2025 targets in the construction strategy paper is that become more reliant on sort of self-sufficient in terms of non-reliance on imports, and potentially to try and even promote and push more exports. So, I know from a design point of view, I know that quite often a lot of materials do come in from mainland Europe. So I don't know, Harbinder or Stefano, maybe would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I can kick off. I think you make a good point. I mean, if you look at what's happening in COVID at the moment, just in terms of the PPP gear, in terms of the equipment that we needed, I think what we realized in this country was that actually we never had an ecosystem within the country to be able to supply the NHS with the equipment that we needed. And actually, I think maybe there's somebody within the government who's thinking about the huge investment in terms of housing and infrastructure that we crave in the country, and the investment that's to be made, and actually where all that stuff's going to come from. We're currently building Hawkins Brown, delivering 3 of the central stations for Crossrail. Now 2 of them are being constructed by Langer Rock, and one of the sort of skins that we're sort of cladding the interior of the station with is a product called GRC, glass reinforced fibre cement. And what Langer Rock did was they said, actually, rather than bring that in from mainland Europe, we're going to basically set up a factory and we're going to make our own. And actually, probably from that R&D with the architects and the engineers and with Crossrail, they actually then fitted out another station. So I mean, there's an example there where there was a need. And actually, there are European sort of manufacturers that are supplying other stations. But there is an example there where there was a need. So if you look at huge projects like HS2, etc., actually is the UK, a great way of sort of like balancing out. I think what was the stat? 72% of the stuff that made Crossrail wasn't supplied from London, right? It was supplied from the Midlands and the North. So actually, if you think about the government trying to balance out the regions about the North, there might be an argument to say that maybe you get all the stuff made and lots of the designers are based outside of London, right? And actually, is that being considered by the government at the moment, right? But if they're going to throw, what is it, 100-odd billion at it, I mean, then maybe they're the sort of strategies that they need to put in place. Someone has to invest. And actually, when you touch upon carbon, what as a specifier, what you really want now is to specify something for your client that they will be able to get. Yeah. And actually, if from Europe there is a blockage and the client goes, well, I can have this one made in the UK and I can get it in 2 weeks, or I can get that one made in Europe and it might come in 12 weeks because of the tariffs and a whole raft of stuff. What are you going to specify, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yeah. And Stefano, what about from your perspective in Zaha Hadid architects? Is that something similar?
Good morning, Simon. Good morning, everybody. From our perspective, I think what we have seen since the talks around Brexit, that our office has relied more on projects from overseas, and those are now, especially in the Far East, and those are the ones that now supplements our work. However, maybe a comment about sourcing materials and technology from overseas. I think we should, in a sense, I think Brexit and sourcing local materials and local products, technology and services I think it has certainly some advantages in terms of the local economy, but also less maybe polluting transportation, and there's a congestion in our transportation. But at the same time, I think one thing that is advantageous in a more connected Europe and world is that the ability to have access to the best product for the job. And I think that always by keeping an eye on the footprint of making the product, transporting the product, delivering the product, and installing the product. However, I think that the local production is welcome, but I think that at the same time, and digital technology could favor that, I think the communications should remain open in terms of finding the best solution for the job.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Darren is leader of Barking and Dagenham, which is a huge regeneration schemes and development schemes. Are you looking to, and I know that there's obviously a real focus on residential and housing, but is there also a big focus on trying to encourage local industry to support some of that local regeneration, and also in that sense, trying to look at the sustainability aspect of things as well?
Absolutely, Simon, and good morning to all the panelists. I've got to be honest, I think all the panelists have been very nice to the government. We agreed to do something that was business destructive, community destructive about 3 years ago, because we had this notion that we were still a world power. Frankly, we are going to hurt from what's going to happen with Brexit. I make no bones about it. I thought it was a disaster at the time. I'm seeing it still be a disaster. I'm building about 50,000 homes. I'm also bringing in major global companies into the area to invest in new jobs that my community desperately need. 50% of my children are in poverty, and just through COVID and what's happening there, I've seen where it was about 14,000 households on UC, now it's 34,000. It could be anything up to 70,000 households. That's 40% of my adult population being on benefit of some description. Now, that doesn't help the UK economy. It certainly don't help our supply economy. It don't help what we're trying to achieve as a community or as a nation. I think government, quite frankly, hasn't put anything really in place that will support business to do business. If they were, then we would be looking at a different type of Brexit. But it's clear that this is more about politics than it is about practicality of delivery. So I'm sorry that I may be a bit more brash than others. They're being very nice to the government, but quite frankly, from where I'm sitting, between this and COVID, it's going to be a tough 2021 through to probably about 2026. Because again, we have a lot of people thinking they don't want to be in the UK, whether that's personally or as businesses. So I think we need to address some real issues. It's great trying to get a local supply chain, and we do that as a local authority. We really do invest in getting a local supply chain. We've got the Barking and Dagenham Business Forum. But the truth is, you've got to want to have people that want to do business with you. And it's a lot tougher under, well, since we announced Brexit. And it's very clear that even America is now changing its view on the whole Brexit situation and where we stand in Europe. And that's very dangerous for the UK economy.
Yeah, and I think maybe one of the things is that, and it reflects on, I think, achieving the carbon zero agenda is sometimes when you get to a position of poverty, from a personal point of view, your ideas of carbon and carbon reduction and sustainability go out the window because you're having to live on the breadline, so to speak. I don't know, Lily, would you comment on that?
Hello. I would say at the end of the day, we have to be flexible. You know, the information that's come from government about, you know, moving towards net zero carbon, I think we still don't really understand what that means. And I think over the next year, I can see Councillor Darren nodding there. I think over the next year, we're going to see some really interesting developments through throughout our industry on how we're going to achieve that, you know, what our action plan looks like. At the moment, we've seen a lot of construction businesses commit to, and clients actually, commit to stretch targets. So the government has said 2050. I'm seeing, you know, construction businesses and big clients committing to 2030. I don't think they really understand how they're going to get there at this stage. It's going to be very interesting to see those action plans when they're made available. But I think, you know, what was mentioned about supporting local, that is something that's very difficult. You know, there's not always the trades and the right businesses locally to be able to keep your spending within a local vicinity. I don't know, Darren, if you've got any suggestions for, you know, how construction businesses can actually support you when it comes to that. You mentioned that there's a local, there's a business forum for developers and construction in your area. But it can be very difficult from the construction perspective to try and engage with some of the smaller trades and the smaller businesses to then achieve some of these really, you know, far-reaching targets like zero carbon that require sometimes some, you know, serious technology to actually achieve some of these things. So yeah, I'm really interested in how you think, you know, construction can support you.
Is that right to come in, Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Just quickly before you come in, and I don't know if people realise in terms of the audience, if you do wish to raise questions and put questions to our panellists, please do use the chat function. Your questions will be reviewed, and then hopefully they'll appear on my screen and I can put them to our panellists. But yes, Darren, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Look, there's all different methods of construction now, MMC, 2D, 3D. There's a whole range of things that we should be looking at now that allows us to build more local, as well as traditional as well. We need to first of all make sure the products that we're going to use are sustainable in longevity and for safety. I mean, we've all seen what's happened when it hasn't, and it's a terrible situation. So we shouldn't be building anything today that isn't green in its entirety, really, because otherwise it just means we've got to retrofit it. It's going to be much harder to do that. So it's a bit beyond me that we're not thinking about that, and you're absolutely right. Government's saying 2050. We all know targets are really 2030 in different guises. The fact that they're trying to centralise planning makes it even more difficult. The local plans are not really there for community to be able to engage with. We're putting a lot of emphasis into training. We spent £9 million on a technical skills college, which are all your main trades and the tomorrow's trades. I mean, we think it's really important. The fact of the matter is, though, to get the industry to engage with us has been really difficult, and we do have some that are starting to do that. But it's like pushing a I don't know, jelly up a hill, if you like. It's really quite difficult. We've got a real issue that most of the UK workforce is in their 50s. They're my age group. Our Redesame pet seems to be what inspired them. I mean, the fact is, we've got to get it back the other way and start showing young people that, you know, a scaffolder earns more than I do as a leader of a council. Sometimes I think it's probably an easier job as well, but we really do need to start investing in the future, because not everyone can be a brain surgeon. And as I often say, it's not degrees that built cathedrals. It was skilled labour that did that. So everyone has a place, and we've got to show that actually they have a value. And that's the problem with our society, government at the moment. It's not really showing value in what people do. So, you know, local government's been stripped out, so we can't invest in those people like we used to, whether it be planners, architects, you know, the whole field of making place. And the private sector's expected to do this. Well, there's no incentive for them to do it particularly. So how do we work together to make it collectively beneficial for the communities that we want to build? at the moment, government hasn't got its head around it. So, Lily, I'm more than happy for you and I, once we finish this, you email me, we'll start changing the world.
Thank you.
Sounds good to me.
It's obviously there's a wide divide growing, because this whole digitization of what we do, which is having a huge impact in terms of the skills. And then obviously you refer to traditional skills, and I work in heritage sector on a number of projects where we're dealing with stonemasons, blacksmiths, real joiners, absolute craftsmen. And there is a distinct world apart from those two. And I don't know, Harbinder and Stefano, you as architects and designers, you're very much at the front end of this digital revolution in terms of the construction industry. How do you see the connect between the two?
Stefano, do you want to start? Do you want to kick off?
Sure, yes, I can. Well, it's true that, yeah, in the last 20, 30 years, we have seen a digital revolution. And I think, to go back to some of the words of the Councillor Darren, I think thinking of the future, I think ahead of us, there is a lot of automation coming up. So I think the work of the builders and the work of the people on site, the construction industry will totally change. And I think we need to promote partially the education to create also new figures around the construction industry with new set of skills. And I think that's why it's very fundamental to change the perspective of what the construction industry actually will do in the future, where more automation will be present. And yes, and education, I think, is key. And the utilizing the latest innovation and technologies available, I think, will be part of it.
And yeah, I just wanted to. I was thinking about in lockdown, when the school shut down in March. You know, my 11-year-old son came home, and the only thing that kept him sane was him and his sort of 5 pals were sort of creating these worlds on Minecraft, right? And they were doing, and I realised, you know, and I looked at him, and he was doing 10-hour days on Minecraft, shouting. I mean, the language that he used was worse than some contractors I've heard on site, right? And he was there with 5 of his boys, and they're shouting and screaming, creating this world. And I said to him, you know something, you are actually doing longer hours than my architects at work, right? And what he was basically saying was that, yeah, but this Minecraft world is better than going to the park, right? It's better than hanging out with you. So actually the young, right, are actually very digitally attuned. And actually, if you look at lots of sort of DFMA, if you look at sort of lots of construction practices, Langrot, Berkeley Homes, etc., all of them are creating these huge factories for building buildings, right? So Darren, you know, I remember one of my first cars from my father was a Sierra Kier, you know, and it was made in Dagenham, right? So essentially, you've got this ecosystem of people that literally were in factories building stuff. They're building cars, right? The car industry might have changed a little, but there is still in their DNA. And you create a big factory where they drive up or they cycle in, and you know they're out of the cold, right? So essentially, what they do is that they're building components, and we're building buildings like we build cars, right? But these youngsters in your area, they're all on PlayStation. They all get it. They can look at the computer, the drawing, etc., and they all know how it goes together, right? And they're really into it. I think it's a shame, you know, when you say, Darren, that the contractors and others and the industry isn't supporting. I find that's a real shame. And I think maybe what it is really is it's an investment from the private sector, right? And actually, what we might ask the government for is that actually, if you really want to get a 16-year-old and see them through, then maybe that investment has to be subsidized by the government, because essentially they're going to become really highly skilled. They're going to be really sought after. To that point, you can start building things in Dagenham that is shipped to Germany. Can you imagine that, right? Where they're using components that are made in East London, right? Well, that would be great. Boris would love that. If Dominic Cummings was there, he'd love that. So why is that not happening, right? When essentially, you know, like now everybody's at home, right? So have you noticed, to try and get a plumber or to try and get a shelf done, it's like hen's teeth to try and get a skilled labourer, because they're not around. They double their prices because the demand is slow. So actually, you're always going to need, whatever anybody says, you're always going to need people that are going to come into your house, 2 or 3 guys, and they're going to make stuff, and it's going to be called. You're always going to need that. But I do think in terms of the 300,000 homes that we need in the UK every single year, they are going to have to be built using another way, and that has to be automated.
Yeah. Okay. We've received a couple of questions here. One harks back to products and materials. The way we currently specify and compare products, equal or approved, has to change. The ability to compare products digitally is available right now using a consistent and standardized approach. How is the government tackling this issue? Fergus, are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree entirely with that. We, since the tragic events of Grenfell Tower fire, have done a great deal of work with the industry and the products industry in particular to look at the processes around how projects are commissioned, materials and the products that are going to be used on them are specified, how they're actually installed, questions around the competency of the people actually doing it, and what it is that we can do to ensure that there is greater transparency about what people are doing and much better information flows around this. And the key to all of this is the digitization of the industry. It is perfectly possible, as the logistics industry and the retail sector have demonstrated for years, that you can identify, tag, track, and monitor every single product that is used in the construction of a building or put on a shelf at Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, wherever, if you really want to do it. It's not that the technology doesn't exist, it's that the industry has not yet built up the capability to do it and is not sufficiently well linked up across all of the different actors within the industry to do it now. But these are one of the reasons that we've been heavily investing in building information management technology. We've done that for years. We introduced the BIM mandate in 2011, came into force in 2016. We're shortly about to upgrade that to take account of the latest international standards for BIM. We've been working with the Construction Products Association and various firms in the product manufacturing sector as part of our Transforming Construction Challenge to look at how we can better integrate these technologies to manage the supply chain and products better. So my expectation is that in 5 years, we will be in a fundamentally different position to where we are now in terms of our ability to track and trace products and understand what's being incorporated into construction projects. And things like the building safety legislation, but also on the private sector side, the requirements of the financial services sector, particularly the banks and the insurers who fund developments, but also provide insurance for the firms that do the work, as well as the owners of those buildings, are also going to require this. So I think in 5 years' time, certainly on major construction projects, you are going to see end-to-end digitization across the whole supply chain.
In that sense, presumably there's going to be a greater accountability from start to finish, or from concept almost, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. And again, the building safety legislation is absolutely clear and explicit about this, that there's going to have to be an individual who is ultimately responsible and accountable for ensuring the safe design, construction and operation of a building.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So another, sorry,
I'd like to make a comment, Simon, which I think it's relevant to that, and it's linked with the material science evolution, which can be a transformative factor for the construction industry. So I think in order to be able to harness that and add value to our projects and the industry, we need to be as flexible as possible on the aspect of material selection. So we've seen that in a number of projects, we may sit under a framework which the materials are almost specified which should be used in a project, rather than performance being specified. So I think we need to shift from specifying materials to specifying performance of materials, so that we are more flexible to make the most out of the high-tech materials which are available in the market at the moment. And we have been working with the HS2 Technical Approval Authority to do that. So we have been testing high-tech materials to prove performance and to prove compliance in order to enable us to introduce these materials on site, which many of them have a positive impact on carbon savings, for example. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Lily, do you want to say anything about what ISG are doing in that respect? Because again, as a contractor, you're obviously purchasing and selecting materials that are very much often based on performance. And presumably there's this, I would say, almost a moral obligation to procure and source from an ethical and sustainable point of view.
Yeah, of course. So often we're driven by an environmental assessment methodology. So that could be BREEAM or LEED, for example. So it's interesting what Pascal said about how often, you know, you're provided with a specification of a material rather than the performance of that, you know, material. And sometimes we are specified with both of those things when it comes to a LEED or a BREEAM assessment building. And then, you know, then ensues some kind of battle essentially about, you know, what it is that we really need to put into this building, whether we have to then value engineer it, which could then have a knock-on effect with our BREEAM or LEED assessment. So it's a never-ending story of, you know, ensuring that the materials specified actually fit the end goal for BREEAM and LEED, and now WELL as well. We're seeing more and more WELL assessments coming through, which is a whole new dilemma because often the WELL requirements can counteract some of the BREEAM or LEED requirements. So, I mean, I think we'd find it very useful. We have our own internal systems where we can, you know, look at different materials and compare them in-house. And, you know, we work with architects, various architects on a regular basis so that we understand, you know, what material options we may have, particularly if we're building similar buildings over and over again. But it would be very useful if there was a database like Fergus mentioned that we could, you know, the whole industry could kind of draw from, and that would enable us to make decisions nice and early on, whether they come from the architect or whether that's something that the construction team can, you know, choose themselves to be able to deliver the right, you know, the right score for our BREEAM and LEED assessments, for example. Yeah, I can't tell you how useful that information would be, and if that's something that the government are working on, then that would be incredibly helpful. Obviously, we're driven as well by local materials and local supply chain, but that's something obviously that we touched on earlier. Yeah, Fergus, if this is something that's coming from government, then, you know, we'd really welcome it sooner rather than later, because that will really help us in delivering, you know, and understanding carbon for each material as well. You know, we're always looking at embedded carbon for our materials, depending on where they're coming from, depending on how they're manufactured. So yeah, yeah, we need that.
I think, Simon, I was just going to say, we've actually sort of, in our practice, we've actually developed a tool called HBIT, which is essentially just that. It's a carbon tool, right? So what you do is essentially all the material blocks that you can ever build anything from. What we've done is that we've looked at a brick, we've looked at a piece of concrete, looked at a piece of aluminium, a piece of glass, right? How much carbon is in that if you used it? When you basically collate your building, your facade, etc., you press a button, and it's a bit like, you know, when you get a fridge freeze, you get an A-star rating, etc. It just gives you, it lets you know what the thing is. And actually, it's really interesting because sometimes a concrete building is more energy efficient than actually if you had a curtain glass. Yeah, we're using aluminium, etc. You know, aluminium is the thing that actually absorbs more energy than most of the things. But actually, I feel sorry for the people that say BREEAM, because BREEAM's quite a sort of a crude sort of tool, and you've got these guidelines and building, and every building is bespoke, right? So the architects crave bespokeness, the planners crave things that are bespoke, etc. And yet what we're having to do now is that we're having to sort of put all these various components together, and then you've got a BREEAM assessment thing. And actually, if you look at how, I mean, look at the new vaccines that are coming out, right? So someone's invented a vaccine, and then it's gone to like 3 peer reviews. You've got the biggest brains sitting there going, is it going to kill 1 million people if we inject them? So they're really checking it. And I do think that what you probably need is a governmental body which says, right, we are going to have an interdisciplinary panel that really looks at a brick or whatever and looks at where it comes from and says, yes, if you use this brick, this is actually the value into the embodied energy. You know, so at least then there's this even, because you're right, in terms of value engineering, it's really hard. If you've got a design and build contract and you're in competition with 3 others, and you're then suddenly having to provide a saving, right? And then suddenly you've got Darren from the council going, well, if I don't get that saving for the housing, I can't build some more housing, so get it, you know. And then what happens with the carbon, right? So then Darren has to go back to his committee and say, we're actually only having 20 houses. Why? Because in the long run, it's going to save us a bit of carbon, simply because of the embodied energy. So it's a difficult, you know, it's a really sort of nuance. But every single proposal that we put forward is bespoke. And how do we offer some sort of leveling out? Now, we've got the biggest engineers, we've got Ian here from AECOM, etc. They are, you know, we've got the biggest brains in the whole of the world. If we can create a vaccine in 9 months, I'm sure we can create this script, right, to create more homes for Darren.
2030.
And to come in here, Simon, to be honest, as a local authority, we've got our own company now doing it. So we've got a carbon neutral 526 build happening on the old Gascoigne. Why? Because actually I couldn't wait for the industry any longer. I am now being proactive. I want an MMC local government product. Why? Because again, I couldn't wait for the industry any longer. I'm fed up whether it's Betamax or VHS or 8-tape or whatever it's going to be. What I want is a product that I can stand behind and say it is firstly safe and secondly, it's environmentally friendly. I live on the Becontree estate. Some of you may have heard of it. It was the first council estate of its kind. We're now looking to see how we can make it ready for the next 100 years, because that's what we need to do. And unfortunately, whilst profit is being put before people, we will never come with the outcome. And that's the problem. Government is not putting its money where its mouth is. We offer government lots of different opportunities to get involved in this, and they don't take it up. And Fergus, I'm not against what you're saying, but I sit here knowing that I had Samuel Garside, which is a building that's only 8 years old. It's 4 stories and it's not covered, but even under the new regs that are going to come in for planning, not covered, so not acceptable. Those people deserve to feel safe in their homes as much as anyone else feels safe. Grenfell, how long has it taken? ACM was only one product. We've got loads of those products. We're having to take products down because they weren't put up properly in the first place, because the industry isn't set up to do that. It's not there to do the best for people. It's there to make a profit. Only local government can be the true bastions of standards. And until government understands that, actually, no matter what you do, people will always try and cut corners, because we're demanding it because we want more for the money we're giving. And that's not a sustainable way to do business if we want to actually build the homes we need. In London, there's 250,000 homes that could be built tomorrow. They've been given planning permission, but yet it's government that's attacking planners and local authorities and not actually looking at new ways of trying to develop the industry. That's really where we're going to get the answers. So I don't disagree, and I'm pleased you are doing bits and pieces, but we've got to do it holistically, because we can do it now. We're starting to do it as local authorities, because we don't need anyone else, because we can't trust anyone else. And that's the problem. If you can't trust who you're in business with, you're not going to do business.
So it's quite a shame that when you say that about trust, because trust is one of the things that certainly as an industry we're trying to embrace much more in terms of the collaborative working that's going through the industry. I think, Ian, did you want to come in there just before as well?
Yes, yeah, there were a few points I'm happy to make, but I'll slim it down to one. Otherwise, I'll probably use up most of the time we've got left. But there's a number of our clients are asking us about our multiple capitals approach to project selection at the moment, and that's where we're using not just financial value to estimate the value of a project. It's looking at the carbon, it's looking at the social value, the intellectual value that the project can bring. So for projects like in Darren's council, that's, well, how can the project have a long-term impact on the local community? So how do we help upskill the local population to contribute to this project and then future projects, and how do we make sure that the supply chain is appropriate, and on all of those things. And so when you're looking at a project overall, it's not necessarily the financial value that's the critical factor. It's bringing in those other environmental impacts and the amenity values that a project can have as well. And I will just briefly mention, we've talked a lot about automation and, or let's just build a database, or let's go and build a whole load of factories to construct housing. It's great in theory, but there are a number of blockers within the industry that are slowing us down. One is there's a lot of grey-haired people at the top of organisations that don't understand the digital process and how automation changes the way we have to deliver a project, and it fundamentally changes it from day one when we get the first master plan sketch all the way through to the operation and the deconstruction at the end. And until we understand and start changing the way that we deliver our projects, then we will never make the most of our automation. We will continue to try and shoehorn new ways of working into our existing methodologies, and we won't gain the benefits that we can do. And again, that's something that we're trying to do at AECOM, is trying to connect those parts up and deliver optimization and automation through the whole project lifecycle. But we need a driver, and potentially while Brexit is going to be a big hiccup to the way we live and work, it might provide that drive that is needed or that constraint that is needed to change the way we work. Because at the moment we're making the right noises and we're trying to do things, but until there's some sort of constraint to drive us forward, we're unlikely to fundamentally change and succeed in the ways that we need to.
There's two things that, in terms of what you say there, Ian. One is the digital thing, and for me, it's a bit like what Harbinder said. It comes from the digital revolution is coming from the bottom up, and us grey hairs at the top. Actually, do we really need to understand it? Part of it is we understand how the buildings are built. We're a bit like the craftsmen who are at the top end, and the digital people at the bottom, and it's trying to make that connect between the two. Because they're very, young people are very adept with digital processes, but it's all well and good. And I remember when CAD became the thing, that we had CAD technicians, and they were very good with computers, but they didn't necessarily understand the technicalities of how design went together, and there was a disconnect sometimes between the two. So I think there's a real need in education there, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I think that there's the it's about the sort of the education as well, and trying to bring people into the education side of things. And coming back to what Darren was saying about, there's how there's trying to get the right skills in there. Whether the people want to come into the construction industry, how do you get them in there? And I suppose a lot of people, there's trying to get that connect between the people wanting to come in, the dirty industry sort of syndrome. Does anybody want to pick that up?
Yeah, I'm happy to say something.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as a construction firm, ISG, we have loads of targets that we set ourselves, regardless of what maybe the local council may request. It tends to go very nicely hand in hand with what clients or local councils may request. But we work with something called a social value portal, and we put on there all of our aspirations and objectives and targets for a project, and that covers all sorts of things on apprentices, community engagement. That could be with any kind of walk of life. That could be with those that are unemployed trying to get into work. That could be with children trying to change their perspectives of what it's like to work on a building site, or what it's like to work in a construction firm, because there are so many different jobs available. It's not just, someone with tools in their hand on the ground. We all know there's lots of opportunities there. And as a business, like many other contractors, we want to leave a legacy behind. We want to be able to walk away from an area and feel like we've done something positive and long term. And a lot of the time, the buildings that we put up will hopefully provide local employment for local people. So I just wanted to raise that, you know, there are many construction businesses now doing this. Some have been doing it for a long time, some do it better than others. I've worked in quite a few principal contractors over the years, and I've got to say that I think ISG set themselves some pretty serious targets that can be quite difficult to meet. But I mean, we have to start stretching ourselves, you know, and it's really important. I've been going out there with some of the local schools in the areas that we work in to work on these STEM schemes, so trying to get kids into science and tech and everything, and also trying to get girls, for example, into that as well. You know, I would never have thought as a child that I'd be working in construction, but then I also didn't know that there was the sustainability field for construction, and when I found out, it just ticked a number of boxes for me, and I really enjoy it. It's also interesting to see on the panel as well. I'm the only female here, but also you find that there's many females in sustainability and not so many males. So that's another topic of conversation altogether. But yeah, also we've been talking about digitisation, and I just wanted to say something about aftercare. Because for me, from a sustainability perspective, I want to understand that the building that we have put together performs as per design from an energy and efficiency point of view. Because, you know, we go out there, a lot of the buildings that we build can be quite similar in their structure, for example. And there's some really interesting products out there at the moment. We're working with one or two organisations to develop some kind of aftercare package. That means that we, as a sustainability team, that this also obviously works really nicely for the engineers in our team to understand exactly how the building performs, what the user interface is. And then for us, it's to understand, well, how can we make energy efficiency savings in the way that the building is used? And then also, if we go on to build another building, are there design changes that we could make next time that would have a positive impact? So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that from a sustainability perspective, it's really important for us to now understand how our buildings are actually performing, even once we've walked away. I think BREEAM sometimes goes some way to try and do that, but it's a credit that's not necessarily mandatory, and so is not often taken on by the construction team, because they don't necessarily have that relationship with the end user of the building. So yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
In terms of BREEAM, and I've heard it mentioned obviously a couple of times already, and the fact that BREEAM it's been around a long time, but doesn't necessarily tick all the right boxes. But as far as I've seen in a number of projects, it can quite often be a planning condition. Darren, do you think as a council that you should be looking at alternative standards, and whether that be WELL or LEED or something like that, that's becoming more appropriate in terms of carbon and sustainability?
Absolutely. And listen, what Ian and Lily again said, don't disagree. But you're the converted. You're the good boys and girls. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot out there that are not, and they're the ones. Look, if we look at the industry right now, okay, RSLs can't really build for us at the moment, because they've got a massive bill to try and retrofit to actually get up to standards that mean their properties don't need waking watches. You know, the industry itself, you know, is in a bit of a shock, because actually, are they going to be hit with lots of bills by government for retrofitting again private buildings? That's the real issue we have as local authorities at the moment, that we are being asked to facilitate change when actually the need of it is really great, the want of it is very poor in the industry. And I agree with Lily. You know, the fact that on this call, you know, it's male dominated, yeah, and why, if I'm being honest. Now, you know, in my council, we're the most diverse in London. Why? Because actually we pick from the whole community. Everyone has a value there. In that technical skills college that we run, despite we train young men and women every year, they are not getting the jobs. They're not getting the jobs for many different reasons, but one of them is the fact they can't even get out of the borough because the cost of transport, because you only do a job, say you're in Barking and Dagenham 1 week, next week you're in Ealing, and there's no scheme in London. Now, I've been saying, and the late great Tony Pidgley, who I got on very well with, even though we come from very different parts of the pendulum, it's fair to say, we met in the middle on lots of issues because he understood the future of the industry was about people and building homes that were sustainable in its truest sense. And one of the things me and him spoke about was he didn't need his travel card, but he got one because he automatically got one because of his age. The fact is, he could have donated that to someone just starting out in the industry, and he was willing to do it, but there was no mechanism for that to happen. So what local authorities should be, we should be the bastions of facilitation. We should be the people that say, these are the standards we want to see, and if you go below those standards, expect us to do something about it. Because actually far too much has been built over the last 20, 30 years that quite frankly doesn't hit the standards we know they need to hit. The retrofit bill in London alone is colossal, and it's stopping us from building. So we've got to start saying, what are our true collective values here? What do we want to see? Because at the moment, there's a lot of nice words and there are individual companies that are doing it, but there's still far too many out there that try and do it for their own benefit and not for the benefit of the community. We want to be trusting, we want to work with, you know, but actually what's happening now is lots of councils are starting to do it themselves again in the private sector, because we don't want the silliness of the HRA, because it actually doesn't help. That's the housing revenue account that was set up under Margaret Thatcher when she split the income. But it doesn't help us because, again, there's no benefit in us building something that we sell and can only get a third of its true value back. So what we need to do is start working in the private sector, and a lot of us have set up our own companies now, and we're doing it ourselves. And we're doing it with partners. There's people that we trust, and they will do well out of it. IHG, I know your reputation. I know it's very, very good. So if there was something you was looking to do with us, we would look at that as a genuine partnership. But we've got a lot more savvier now because we've had to, because of the state of the industry as was. And I have to say, I go back to Mark 1S school. We have lots of engineers in Barking and Dagenham. We also designed and built the Capri. So we know about engineering. And the truth of the matter is, we're engineering for tomorrow's world. So we've got the largest data center in Europe being built right now. We've got the largest film studios coming in 25 years, and we've got a world-class science and engineering facility being built. That's not including the free markets of London. That's not including the fact that we'll have a train that will go to 80% of the world's economies. But we know our value now, and we're prepared to fight for the value of our communities. And that's something the industry has to get ready for, and the good players will benefit from it. And hopefully we can get rid of the people that have actually pulled us all back. But then government has to give us the freedom to allow us to have that partnership that will truly work for communities. Sorry, long-winded, but very passionate about it.
Thank you. I'm going to try and combine a couple of questions here that have come in. This goes back to sort of off-site. So one of them is we're getting requests for off-site methods. Who do you think is driving this agenda, the client or the main contractor? And obviously, you know, how does it contribute to the goal of greener construction in terms of saving time, carbon, and costs? And just through bringing that together with another one, which was about, I think it was referenced earlier on to about London being ahead of the curve. And whether team members or panel members have considered things like design for manufacture and assembly and using other third-party type industries to construction. And that question came from somebody who was based in London but has a supply chain based in Newcastle for large volume residential delivery. So Who wants to pick that up?
I can just, yeah, I can say something about that. So in terms of making that greener for construction, I can't say whether it comes necessarily from the client or from the contractor. It varies. It depends totally on the project, the location, and what you're building. But from my perspective, from a sustainability perspective, yes, off-site prefab can be better for the environment at face value, because you're obviously minimizing waste production on site, which is great. Therefore, there's less waste collection, so then you're reducing carbon in terms of the vehicles coming to site. You're also reducing carbon because you're not having so many smaller materials deliveries to site, so that's good. Also, if you're in a built-up area, you know, you're not creating nuisance with your traffic management, you know, with various vehicles going in and out of site. Also, it helps with the construction phase to be much quicker. So in theory, if you've got a lot of prefab coming into site, you know, you can knock off weeks of your program, which then means you're potentially creating less nuisance again for those people who live or work around your site. So those are kind of the key things there. But to caveat that, obviously, just because you're not creating the waste on site, you're creating waste somewhere. So you're then reliant on the fact that your manufacturer is doing the right thing in terms of what waste that they're producing. You'd like to think that there would be an opportunity perhaps for them to reuse their waste and create it into something else. But, you know, that's, again, completely dependent on what they're producing. But I would say those are the key things. So it's about, it actually really helps with carbon reduction because you're getting vehicles off the road, helps reduce nuisance, and it reduces, you know, the direct waste production on site.
Excellent, thank you. That brings me on. I'll bring you on something else. Go on, Pat. Is it Pascal?
Yes, Simon. So I'm going to comment on that with regards to who is leading, etc. So I think we've got a number of great examples from tier one contractors leading on this space. As far as I'm concerned, I've seen, you know, some really best practices from Lengo. If I'm right, I know that they years ago they managed to set up a factory to promote off-site manufacturing. When I was with the Birdi group, there was a part of the strategy which our CEO Leo Quinn promoted was the 25 by 2025 agenda, which was about reducing activity on site by 25% by 2025. And what we have been doing at EKFB is we're heavily promoting off-site manufacturing. One of the latest examples is that we're looking to introduce UHBFRC solution, which is an ultra-high performing fiber reinforced concrete on bridges, which is an innovative thing. It's a UK first, especially for bridges. So this is an off-site solution. And just to follow up from what Lily mentioned, off-site is not as great because it allows for carbon savings, obviously, and better delivery time. But I think at the same time, it's a solution which eliminates safety incidents, etc., as there's less activity on site. So I think there are many advantages on this aspect. Obviously, on the other hand, I'm sure there are many public organizations promoting that and supporting that, which I cannot comment at this stage. But yeah, I just wanted to mention all these good examples coming from the tier one contractors. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think that also on top of all of these advantages of site construction, I think building things in a controlled environment allows to build more sophisticated elements in an easier way. So I think, and the responsible for pushing this side of the industry, I think, should be the architects. And in my company and in my experience, I think for many, many years, we have seen building based on a system of components that become even big components with mega components that can take the size of a truckload, right? And I think that will definitely allow to improve the science of the building science and the thermodynamics of the building, because more complexity can be built and more intelligent and more innovation can be built inside the building component and achieve much better performance with all the advantages that we said before. So a controlled environment also allows to use tools that on a construction site are not yet easy to use, like robotic, from robotic weldings to laminating things, and then use sophisticated technology to achieve higher standards.
Yeah, just to pick up on one point that was raised about learning from other sectors. The government has used DFMA and modern methods of construction to deliver a range of built asset for years. We've done it with schools, we've done it with housing, we've looked at using it for things like prisons, and obviously in the infrastructure sector as well. The next generation of these technologies that we are actively working on developing and commercializing now is based on a concept that's been used in the automotive industry for 30 years, where you have a product platform, which is essentially what Stefano was talking about, where you design a set of interoperable components that you can combine in various ways and use to build various types of built asset. And we're supporting a number of projects, private sector, office spaces and things like that, and on the public sector side, looking at schools in particular, but we have ambitions to expand that into hospitals as well, which and we do think that the impact of these could be transformational in terms of the quality and the efficiency and sustainability of buildings, for all the reasons that have been set out by other members of the panel. It's the ability to perfect the design, and through repeat specialist manufacturing, to actually produce things that very, very efficiently to consistently high standards of quality. But but in terms of what people really care about, which is the ultimate performance of the built asset, the results of this approach are looking even more exciting. So at the moment, we think that by moving to this approach, we can reduce the amount of material that you need to produce a school by round about 20%. Which has significant consequences, obviously, for both the time that's actually spent delivering on site, but also the amount of embedded carbon within the building, and the UK's overall materials requirement. So this is probably the next generation of construction technologies. And again, I mean, I would expect in the next 5 to 10 years, you to be starting to see a vast range of building types being built using this approach.
I think
to say, for me, one of the things about that is legacy. Is how long are these buildings going to last for? The first generation of system-built houses, or system-built schools, sorry, was class. I think most class schools have gone now. Yeah, Victorian schools have stood the test of time, and if you look at them in terms of embodied carbon, that must make them exceedingly efficient. So, what are we building for the future in terms of off-site manufacture? Are we building buildings that are going to last 100 years?
I think so. I mean, there's a lot of Victorian buildings that were so poorly built they were torn down, right? No one talks about that. There's a whole raft, I think we have this nostalgia about this old building stock, but actually, if you live in them now, unless you're going to throw £200,000 at it, right, and insulate them and put a new underfloor heating, are they great places? They're a bit drafty, do we really want that? And actually, if you think about the way we're building new buildings, actually, I was just going to say that actually, we wouldn't very rarely, as an architect, get a client saying to us, it must be off-site, yeah? Everything has to be componentized. What they're saying to us is that you design us a building. What we are finding more and more, though, is that with very large-scale developers, and contractors like Mace, for instance, we're doing a prefab, an offsite constructed tower, residential tower in East London, in Stratford. And actually, that's where essentially our ultimate client who is constructing the building has a relationship with the ecosystem in terms of the people that are going to make the components. And I think what we haven't got at the moment is, like, how can a client get a competitive tender when only one person can make the prefabricated components? Whereas if there's 3 or 4, and I was thinking about all these out-of-town shopping centres that are not going to exist anymore, turn them into factories, you know, that build our homes possibly, you know. But as in what we, you know, you need a space, you need an ecosystem to be able to make these components, and what the client really wants is best value. And what we're hearing in the industry, all the people that we talk to, who are all the big contractors, they are all now investing. Everything from the MEP, right, the ductwork, all the way to the building envelope. They are now seriously thinking about how they construct. And why? Because they have to, because the labour supply is so low. And why? Because for some reason, and it's back to Lily's point and Darren's, is that for some reason construction isn't sexy. No one wants to go into it. Yeah, 50% of 18-year-olds are going to university. 50%. We've taken on an apprentice, an architectural apprentice who lives in Hayes and Harlington. She's getting paid to learn to be an architect. The average, I mean, Stefano will know this. All architects we have huge debts. You know, it takes us an average 9 years to become a chartered architect. Our debt level currently at the moment is about £90,000 a graduate. Why would you do it? Why would you do it? You know, it's just, and actually that has to change. So I see already there being this huge shift into apprenticeships where people are actually saying, I'm going to earn as I learn. I really want to know my skill. But I do think, I mean, Darren, your point, you know, regarding the government could really, really push this. And it boiled back, really, you know, your point, my wife's a school teacher, get into schools, right? Get into schools, right? You know, if you went in there and said, actually, if you're, you know, if you're working on a construction site, this is the figure that you're earning, you know, you're not standing there in the cold, you've got a cappuccino, a flat white in your hand, you're driving around, you get, it's a great thing. You see a building, you go, I did that, Mum. It's a great feeling, right? I don't think enough of that happens. And if you've got them at the age of 8 or 9 when they're doing Minecraft, you've got them for life.
You can do better than that, and it's really quite cheap. I come up with it yonks ago, and that's top trumps. All of us used to play top trumps. Yeah, you put on there all the different things, what qualification, what how many years, you know, so the negatives, the positives, but you do that across the industry. Actually, you do that at junior school and you give every child those top trumps, it starts getting into their psyche. Okay, because thank God it's just before Minecraft. I know that because I've still got going up once to know it. But I mean, again, it's all about government facilitating, whether it's national government or local government. And Fergus, I'm pleased to hear. I mean, we built with Porter Cabin Group. We built one of the first, well, the largest through school in the country. I've got the 2 largest schools in the country in secondary, and I've got the 2 largest primary schools in the country. So I know all about how to build schools. I also know that we're a part, 2/3 of the borough's the Becontree estate, where it built all the infrastructure. You can't expect the private sector to put in all the infrastructure and build us the homes. Yeah, government has got to start understanding its job is to facilitate. And for every pound you put into what we would class as traditional housing, council housing, actually the return is the best you can get, because it's the aspiration afterwards. At the moment, government isn't doing that. And again, the fact that we've probably got one of the biggest MMC reports going for London, and we are looking to see what we can do with that. So we've got a scheme where it's 350 units. It's all going to be MMC, because we need to start understanding what we're going to do. We've learned from the past. The Becontree estate, 16 different designs, okay, replicated across the country. Well, MMC is going to be the same thing. It's got to be the 21st century of the Becontree estate that's still here 100 years later, and actually still good enough to live in, as I live in one. So we've got to learn from what works and stop tinkling around the edges as they're doing with these white papers right now. The safety white paper doesn't go far enough. It should be from the ground upwards. No one should ever live in fear of whether they're going to have a problem in the home that they call home. Yeah. At the same time, retrofitting. There's a whole industry there. I remember when the Right to Buy came in and everyone decided they had to have heating indoors. So they ripped out the old fireplaces, and Servo Warm, if we go back that far, was one of the companies that used to do it. My mum and dad got their place done by them at that time. There's a whole industry here that we can help rebuild the country on, but the government's got to be there to facilitate it, not lead it, because local government and national government are really bad at leading things. Our job is to facilitate the ambition and the drive, but making sure that it's actually value for money to the community, because that's where we're missing at the moment, and we're seeing that across the whole industry. So it's really good to hear governments doing it, but it's really strange that they're still not talking to local government, and everything they're proposing at the moment is to taking powers away from local government, who is the arbitrator of the values within the industry and also within the community. So it's how we can play that really strong part of developing it all together, because at the moment it still isn't joined up.
Sounds like a long way to go yet.
On that note, Simon, I think that we're at a critical point in modern methods of construction, in that we've started to use it, and there are a number of people that are trying to scale it up at the moment. But if we don't want to, we need to make sure we learn the lessons of the previous attempts of prefab, in that we keep the quality high and we make sure that the best techniques are used. And if not, we'll lose the public opinion on the technology if we're not careful. And so there's going to be, and as we're talking about, everybody's trying to ramp it up and build the capacity as quickly as possible. There's a real risk that we won't do it to the right levels of quality, and then we have to go back through and start again. So I think there's, while yes, the government at all levels needs to be the facilitator, we also need to make sure that we've got robust controls in place to make sure that the product that we're getting out of the back of it is of a useful, and also it goes back to the pieces that we've all talked about from the beginning about how you design it and what materials do you use in the first place, and until we've got that joined up piece, then we're at real risk of messing it up.
You've hit on two things for me. One is the construction industry, as we procure and contract at the moment, is not appropriate for MMC offsite manufacture and assembly, and we don't seem to be doing very much about it. And the other one is in terms of offsite manufacture and assembly, how can we embrace the circular economy, which is for me the ultimate in terms of sustainability and within what we're doing. Lily, maybe you want to pick up on that second part.
Yeah, happy to. So in terms of the circular economy and prefab, I mean, anything really that we're bringing to our sites, we need to understand what the life cycle looks like of that product or that material, and what happens to it when it reaches its end of life. So a lot of us are now, as standard, producing life cycle analysis on the buildings that we're doing, or the key components that we're putting into our buildings. Yeah, I mean, ISG have recently put together a circular economy policy that hopefully will launch soon, and that looks at waste, how we can ensure that our waste not only is minimized, but then what we do produce then goes on to something productive and isn't just discarded, and also understanding what the end of life is for all of those key materials that we're putting into our buildings. A lot of manufacturers now, the standard hardware, so your phone or your laptop or whatever, it comes to you, and when it reaches its end of life, there's a note to say you can actually send it back to manufacturer. We need to do something similar in our industry, where when this building reaches its end of life, what will it become? Can it become something else? Do aspects of this building have to be removed and replaced? And yeah, I mean, this is something that's quite new for our industry, but luckily some of us are looking at it now. I've been working on a few data centers recently, and some of these data centers, their end of life is about 20 years before you have to replace all the technology. The technology probably will have to be replaced beforehand because technology is changing so rapidly. What could it be when it's not a data center? You know, what are the you know, what's the future plan? So yeah, I think I'll leave it there, but really what I'm saying is we need to understand what's next for everything that we install. That is not its end of life. We need to look at things in a more circular way.
Yeah, thank you. What about in terms of Pascal? Go ahead.
Yeah, just one comment on that, on the circular economy. I think we need to take a systemic view and approach to this as an industry. And just to give you an example, so there are places which we have projects owned or managed by clients and like public organizations, say Network Rail, Highways England, local councils. You've got tier 1 contractors involved, etc. So, and there's a lot of waste or materials which are not being utilized by the end of the project, etc. So how well are we working together? And that's a question for Darren potentially to answer. So how well are we working together on this aspect to make sure that we're collaborating and we're making the most out of making sure that there isn't any waste left out there which is not adding value?
Okay, I mean, look, there's a long way to go. If I'm being absolutely honest, we're just doing a Riverside, which is 12,000 homes. When I say we, it's with the mayor as well. One of the things we asked there was the MVAC system. Why? Well, the MVAC system means we don't have to have dirty trucks going around collecting the waste. We don't have, people. It's a system that takes it straight to recycling. If when we can get to that space, because we know that probably 90% of everything we use can be recycled in one guise or another. So we should be doing it as a matter of course, and it should be in the product from the very beginning. And that's where I find it quite interesting that, again, we talk about sustainability, but we're not really embracing it. Again, government could have done a lot more in this field and should be doing a lot more. Energy. London produces only 2% of its own energy. What a ridiculous situation to be in when we're in a wind tunnel, when we've got a tidal river that runs for 23 hours a day. And funny enough, it's sunny most days as well. We are the only London borough to map all of our roofs for a solar farm. Now, we've got to try and work how we can make that happen. Why have we not got in our parks, on all of our lampposts could be energy producers. All this is about true sustainability. The new buildings that we're building take very little energy use because they shouldn't have to. I agree that, okay, the old houses used to be a bit I don't know, drafty, yeah, but you know what, I'd much rather live in the house I live today than one of the new ones that get built, because I can hear the neighbours 3 doors along in the new ones. So, we've got to do horses for courses. We've got to start looking at what it means to the community and what they actually want to see. And if we want to see more people being carbon friendly, we've got to give them the ability to do that. And that's upon all of us. So, I'm looking at, I've just had a bit of a moan at my lead guys on resurfacing tarmacking of the road pavement service. And the reason being is, I said, well, why are we not putting infrastructure in now ready for the cars that will be needing it? Because we all know that by 2030, there will be no electric or diesel cars. That's only a decade away. So that means every house will need some form of ability to charge a vehicle. And we know it, so why are we not getting on with it now? And so we do it as local government as well, but it's very frustrating. If we're serious about what we're talking about, then, you know, we need to start showing that there is support for it from government at all levels. And I do think that where we are at the moment, I've got far too many dirty industries in my borough still running in 19th century practices, let alone 20th century. And we need to change that, and we need the powers to change that.
Yeah. Harbinder, just out of interest, when you design houses and residential buildings, are you automatically putting in electric vehicle charging points?
To be honest, a lot of our developments that we do, because we do volume housing, the car is not king, right? So essentially what you do is that you're not encouraged to actually drive a car there at all. But I think, I mean, Darren makes a really interesting point regarding, one, in terms of housing, for instance, we've done lots of housing, which is passive house. So literally you only need a small amount of energy to actually power them because they're so well insulated these days. Regarding the infrastructure, I think we've got a really interesting challenge, right? Because in 2030, what we're saying is that you can't buy a combustion engine anymore, right? So everything's going to have this infrastructure in there in terms of electric. What London really wants, what Hadid really wants, like sort of the Mayor's Infrastructure Advisory Panel, is for people, frankly, to get out of their car and to walk, right? So actually, yeah, for sure, there's going to be a need for sort of like personal mobility to a level. But actually, if you look at most journeys are like a 15, 20-minute walk, but essentially people have got a car, you can drive, so people drive, right? That's what people do, right? And actually, I live in Ealing, and actually we've just had Julian Bell, who you probably know, Darren, is having a bit of a hard time in terms of the LTN. So, there's a couple of sort of like roads that have been closed off, and actually the community is up in arms, or a particular part of the community. And actually what we need to ask ourselves is that, one of the biggest polluters is essentially, automotive. And actually, as a species, we should, we're designed to walk, and we're being encouraged by the automotive industry not to walk, right? So walking is great for you. And actually maybe what we do is if we just widen our streets a little, we get some really good lighting, etc. If everybody walks on the street, we designed a school. And the head teacher said, can you design it so that it's really difficult for parents to park less than 100 meters, right? Because what they were saying was that if you drop off your child from the age of 2 to 14 in a car every single day, how will they see the roads, right? So I, at a principal, walk my son to the school, right? So it's really interesting, I think, psychologically. But, again, Darren, the Conservative government at the moment, maybe what they need to do is that, Boris and Kier Starmer need to sit down and say, we will have a strategy for the infrastructure of the country for the next 25 years. Can you sign up to it? Because essentially, everybody realizes that that's the thing. If they sign on the dotted line and they roll that out, you might have a fighting chance. But until that happens, you won't.
I totally agree. And I use this analogy. After the war, we were broke. Yeah, sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Right? But then we decided as a country that we'd seen the worst in mankind, so we wanted to see the best in mankind. So we had the biggest house building program that ever was. Not always built to the greatest standards. We didn't have all the best facilities then, but we're much better today. So we've got to get back to there and not use the politics of it. We secondly got to say that everyone deserves a good education. Doesn't matter what background, because at the moment it's atrocious what's happening, and it was best borne out when in Eton you could get a test, but actually kids in my borough, they have to wait like everyone else, and that's not acceptable. But everyone deserves a good education, and it's a crime that actually we are making it unsustainable or unachievable for people just because of wealth. That's not acceptable, and they didn't do that after the war. Thirdly, they said that everyone deserves to be looked after when they're ill, and that's when we had the NHS, and thank God we've got the NHS, or otherwise we'd be in a much worse place. Look at America. And then fourthly, we said that everyone, because we're a civilized society, would be looked after. It doesn't mean that there's loads of benefit cheats out there, because actually most people are not, right? But it does say that actually there is a minimum standard that people in a civilized society should work on. Those 4 things should be taken out of the politics. This is one of those 4 things. Should be taken out of the politics. We should have this goal that both or all parties, we say these are our country's values for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, and you might want to have an argument about how you get some of it, but surely it's a better argument than what we've got at the moment, where we've got national government trying to restrict local government to have any involvement in the planning process. At the same time, we've got people that live in communities, whether it's urban communities like mine or the rural communities, basically now being told that the computer is going to say yes when you say no. How have we got to a situation where actually citizens of this country really have no value in making the decisions that are going to make the changes for the future? Sorry, Chair, but as you can tell, I like to rant on about these things.
I think one of the things you talk about, Harbinder, was the walking is great. Unfortunately, I think the digital revolution has made time such a big thing that everything has to be done so quickly that almost it's a case of there isn't almost time for walking. But and I think that's something we have to overcome. I'm conscious of time that we're actually almost at time. But one question which just to change tack completely. Due to the new UK points-based system on immigration, will the construction companies hire non-British professionals if they need professionals from another country? Since the Europeans will also need sponsorship, how can this situation be brought in? And obviously it will have an impact on business. Any quick comments on that?
I just think that if you're looking at consultancies, what they will do is that they will always put a case forward where you need a specific engineer to come from Spain to come over to work in the organisation, and they'll go through the paperwork and the individual will come over. It's no difference from the tech industry. It will just happen. Ian will know that if you need someone with an IQ of 160 to come over from Portugal, they'll get them over. It's not a problem. They'll need it. It'll make them happen.
Ian?
But with COVID, we've demonstrated that we don't need to get them over. We can work quite happily as digital teams, across. I work with colleagues across Europe and in fact across the globe all of the time. And COVID has demonstrated that with a little bit of will, there's very little that you can't achieve remotely these days. As here we are at London Build Online. Last year I was in a big hall, and this year we're doing it online. There's very little from a consultancy point of view that we can't do remotely, and having that global reach means that we can do lots of exciting things that we can now do by using the right person with the right skill, regardless of where they are, to deliver a project.
I mean, I think the hiccup there is when that engineer from Portugal wants to live in London, right? Because essentially, if that engineer is there and then somebody from India then says, "I'll give you a bit more," then suddenly they work for another company. So essentially, somebody in Europe might want to live in London, or they might want to live in Manchester, and they want to move, right? And I suppose that's the question: is that when they want to move to live in another city for another life experience, how easy will it be for us to bring them over? And if you want to spend an extra £8,000 or £9,000 on visas, etc., to do that, then that individual has to be right for the organisation.
It's interesting. We found a loophole in the Brexit then. But I'm conscious that we've hit our 90 minutes, and I suspect we need to say thank you very much to everybody for taking part this morning. Fergus, Pascal, Ian, Harbinder, Lily, Darren and Stefano. It's been some great discussion. Hopefully for the audience, it's given a lot of insight into some of the key topics. I mean, off-site manufacturers, obviously, it's still got a long way to go, but very much high on the agenda. Carbon is huge. The planning and what local authorities have to deliver, and obviously the connect between local government and central government is high on the agenda. So probably could have carried on a lot longer, I suspect, on a number of topics. But thank you very much to all of you. And I don't know, I presume, Selena, are you still there?
Yep, still here. I'll take over now, Simon.
You, Selena. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Simon, for moderating. Big thank you to every single one of our panelists and to everyone in the audience who has joined us for the first session of many yet to come over the next 2 weeks. So I hope that you can all join us for the next session of the day. Just to let you know that today's sessions will be available on demand via the website, and that all sessions are CPD accredited, so you'll receive your certificates within a month after today. If you have any feedback or further questions for us, please drop us an email and we'll come back to you as soon as possible. So our next session is actually taking place at 1 p.m. This is a panel discussion on disruption, digitalisation and decarbonisation, trends shaping the construction industry. So thank you everyone, stay safe, and we hope to see you all for the final 2 sessions of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.